All right.
All right, so I'm here with Dr. Andrew Katelaris, Dr. Pot, and we're just trying to get an idea of where things are at, especially after the hemp conference, where you had some visitors after you'd done a video with, was it Channel 7 that you did the video
Yeah,
with?
Channel 7 Sunday tonight.
Sunday tonight. And
Yeah.
so when the people approached you to do that video, what did you think was going to happen out of that video?
Well, we had extensive discussions with the producer, one of the producers, to gain assurances that this was going to be a serious human issues story and present the facts in a balanced way. I'm not naive, but I was convinced that they were doing a serious story. The fact that they didn't is neither here nor there for Australian media. I mean, they don't have a very high bar of performance sort of criteria, so that's what we got.
Okay, and when you did the production, what do you think was what caused the authorities to come and visit you? What do you think ticked them off?
Everyone wants to ask me what motivated the authorities.
Yes.
I mean, obviously it was a public show of defiance, and they felt the need to respond to that. Not too surprising a position. But we were of the impression at this stage, because of the results that we're actually obtaining, us and others obtaining, including official trials, that they would actually back away from clumsy police action. But that wasn't the case. So we'll now meet them in court.
Right. And so what in fact did happen after the production? You were visited by the police, and what happened?
Yeah, I think it was the show went on a Sunday evening. Tuesday morning there was, I wouldn't call it a knock on the door, it's more like a sort of a guerrilla thumping on the door, and we were confronted by 11 or 12 riot-type police dressed in their overalls with the tasers and the door hammers ready to smash the door in. I mean, a bunch of half-witted Boy Scouts would be an accurate description of them.
That's unfortunate. So when they came here, what were they looking for? What do you think they were, what were they expecting to find?
Okay, I mean, they were basically wanting to see the room as it was featured on TV, and they were taken there without too much fuss and shown that.
And what did they take away?
Well, they took a lot of irrelevant things, but the salient things were 11 kilograms of cannabis. It's important from our point of view, 11 kilos does a lot of medical cannabis. This was extracted cannabis bud, something we'd already taken the cannabinoids out of and made into epilepsy medicine. So we lost nothing at all. In fact, this was kept there as a stage prop. So in the event of an arrest, we would certainly be charged with an indictable quantity and not appear before a magistrate, but appear before a jury in at least a district court.
Oh, fantastic. So that's what you're expecting to...
Well, that's what will happen. I mean, I've been charged with an indictable offence, and I will demand my right to a trial by jury. And at that trial, we will present what we'd like to think is going to be Australia's first medical necessity case that ends in a victory.
Oh, so it's actually come out pretty good.
Yeah. At some stage, I mean, I would have much preferred that we just had a sensible government that moved rapidly to provide at least interim measures. Even if their TGA-approved medicine is not available, they have to loosen the reins on the local production of cannabis. So it's what we refer to as interim measures, so the people's suffering can be relieved immediately, or as soon to immediately as is practical, rather than wait for these mythical trials to actually be completed.
Yeah, and you were saying the current system doesn't really favour that, and you said what are the main issues you feel that...
There's a huge number of issues. Now, the first thing is this insistence, and I'll go back one step. We were very happy, I think about 18 months ago, when Richard Di Natale, the leader of the Greens, proposed that we have an independent office of medical cannabis to regulate the cultivation, the production and the distribution of cannabis. That's something that suited us. His bill was excessively wordy, but it was reasonably focused, and the important point was there was an independent office of medical cannabis. Unfortunately, Turnbull saw differently, and in loyalty to his political and financial masters, he wouldn't support that independent office of medical cannabis. Instead, they placed the control of cannabis firmly under the TGA, or the Therapeutic Goods Administration. This has a number of serious problems. The first is with TGA approved medicine, only doctors can prescribe it. Now, I remind the listeners that doctors generally have been disparaging the medical effect of cannabis for the last 40 years. Right? They're scientifically illiterate, they're morally vacuous if they take that position, but that's the position they've taken. So we don't want the cannabis that's been denigrated by practitioners now to be only prescribed by those, because they don't have the skill or the motivation or the ethics to actually handle that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, because of TGA approval, the cost of the medicine is going to be very high. Just as an example, with the children with epilepsy that we treat, the average cost of medication is about $150 a month, depending on the dose and other variables, but about $150 a month. For the equivalent coming from GW Pharmaceuticals in Great Britain, that cost will be $1,500 a month, which anyone can see is an absurdly inflated price on a herbal product. Yeah, that's enough. The third thing, though, is that take childhood epilepsy. Childhood epilepsy can arise for a number of different conditions. You may have Dravet syndrome, you may have West syndrome or Lennox-Gastaut. There's dozens of different epileptic syndromes. Now, unfortunately, with the TGA regulations, you have to run an independent trial on each condition. You can't just deal with childhood epilepsy and treat them as a generic group. You have to do a Dravet trial and a West trial and a Lennox-Gastaut trial. These things are almost impossible to organise because the conditions are rare and they're moved around the country. So really, the Turnbull move is a massively retrograde move, right? Our position is, and always has been, there must be a 3-tier supply of cannabis. The first tier, and this is a non-negotiable tier, is home growing. And that's not some sort of small quota of 1 or 2 plants. Home growing, up to 20 plants per person. The only stipulation, it can't be for sale. The next one is proxy growing, where interested and concerned people are running compassionate access schemes, and it is for sale, but at a fair price. The important thing there is that it's, what can I say? The important thing is that it's available and accessible right now. Right? Just take childhood epilepsy, for instance. It has a cumulative mortality of 15%. By that I mean, in the group of intractable epilepsies, and that's epilepsy that can't be controlled by current allopathic medicine, 15% or 1 in 7 of these kids die each year. Right? So in 7 years, that whole cohort is gone. Time is not on their side. And this really has to be looked at. It really shows the governments of all stripes, Liberal, Labor, federal and state, to be heinously ignoring the needs, the life-saving needs that this medicine brings to the game. It's a game changer if it's allowed to be.
Now, you've been primarily focusing on epilepsy, but there's a number of other conditions that can be addressed with medicinal cannabis immediately, or as far as I'm hearing, but what's your...
Well, when you say initially focused on epilepsy, certainly our first dozen patients were epileptic children, and that was for the practical reason that they didn't take much of the drug because they were only little people, so we could make it go further, and the results were often life-changing. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say we've seen children go from wheelchairs to push bikes in a month or two of treatment. We've seen kids return to normally family life after major disruptions. It is a game-changing, life-changing event for the whole family. The financial saving to the country is enormous. Like some of these sick children with intractable epilepsy may spend 2 or 3 months in hospital per year at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a great stress on the ambulance system and in the intensive care system. All this can be done away with, or at least to a large degree. So there's win-win all around. The child themselves, their parents and friends, the hospital system, all benefits from this initiative. But we're not concentrating only on epilepsy. I mean, the fascinating thing about CBD therapeutics is the breadth of its application. Things like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, Tourette syndrome. There seems to be very little end to the range of conditions where we can usefully intervene. And that's even before we get into the whole cancer business. It's a broad field that we're moving into.
So I see why you were focusing on epilepsy, because you get some results pretty quickly.
Spectacular results quickly.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I mean, the relief to, as you said, not just to the system, but as well to families is enormous.
And there's a couple of important points. When the allopathic doctors talk about success with their allopathic anti-epileptic drugs, they simply talk about the reduction in seizures. So say they give you a Valium-based drug like clobazam or something like that. The child might be seizure-free, but the cost of that is an inert, emotionally blunted child which is almost incapable of actually learning. Right, so their criteria for a success of a drug is something that reduces seizures by a certain percentage, something like 30-40%. It's meaningless in terms of what they mostly claim for a success. We'd call a failure if we were therapeutically responsible for what's going on. Right?
Yep. Now we were talking earlier about Rick Simpson's protocol, and while you've had some experiences, what can you share about your experience with the Rick Simpson?
Well, broadly, we have to say there's still a lot of learning to be done with the use of cannabis in cancer. Now, a few things are beyond discussion at this stage. That is, it's a much superior pain-relieving, nausea-preventing medicine than the allopathic drugs. The narcotics, especially the endone, the oxycontin, and those semi-synthetic narcotics, have a serious side effect profile. They cause symptomatic constipation, nausea, anorexia, and by all indications, they probably accelerate the progress of the disease. So they're really best left for the very terminal phase of a cancer illness, and we can control some of the symptoms of the cancer more safely and more effectively with cannabis medicine. In terms of actually impacting directly on the cancer, that's a much bigger story, but there's certainly pretty convincing tissue culture work, animal model work, and human anecdotal reports of cancers being positively affected by the deployment of cannabis medicines. We've certainly regularly take patients well beyond the amount of time the doctors estimate they had in the final phase of their cancer illness. So cannabis undoubtedly delays the progress of cancer. This isn't just hippie stuff. The GW Pharmaceutical Company ran a trial adding CBD THC cannabis to their usual chemo regime in lethal brain cancer, in glioblastoma, and they found there was nearly a doubling of the life expectancy. There was a very significant improvement in longevity and disease-free interval. So it has the official imprimatur as well. These things aren't made up, they're reality. What we would like to do though is actually do some work. There are plenty of excellent animal models. Take the next one down in lethality from GBMs, that'll be the pancreatic cancer. There's an excellent mouse model where skilled scientists inject cancer cells into the pancreas of mice, and because of their shortened lifespan, we can follow them over generations or over their lifetime much more quickly and get a clear answer within sort of 6 months as to which combination of high THC, high CBD or an equal blend is the most effective. We need these sort of trials because the patients we work with are very, very disparate. They're at different stages in the evolution of their disease. They have different nutritional status. They have different psychological and sort of mental status. And it makes it very hard to arrive at a particular view as to what's the most important or the most effective way to actually intervene in cancer. So we do need to do trials, and we'd like to do those trials very quickly rather than at the dawdling pace the government is doing it.
If people were wanting to support what you're doing right now, what are some of the ways that people could help?
What can I say? At this stage, we're in a holding pattern. We're waiting for our court case. What we want there is to establish the legal precedent of a medical necessity for the cultivation and preparation of cannabis medicines. A medical necessity in law means it's actually the result to the person and the population is better if the law is broken than if the law is adhered to. And if there was ever a case for medical necessity, it is the one that involves medical cannabis. So watch this space. We're happy that we can take this forward and actually gain a significant legal precedent victory in this instance.